great one is, here's to the best years of my life spent in the arms of another man's wife, my mother, my mother. Now that, you could steal that, you could use that. Another one of my friends, his favorite toast was, whiskey, oh whiskey, I've known you of old. You've robbed my pockets of silver and gold. You've knocked me down and kicked my shins. Dadgum your soul, I'm going to try you again. And of course, I was privileged to be in Texas visiting some family members. Texas is another country, of course. And their toast was only 2 words. This was in Lukenbach, Texas, which is basically a post office box and a barn, and 300 people in a cow pasture who are having a good time. But their toast is only 2 words: holler, yeehaw, and swaller. Holler and swaller. That's the Texas toast. And one of the ones that I really like is, O Lord our God of grace divine, who first turned water into wine, protect us from those wicked men who dare to change it back again. And I think we should end on that one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sid. At this time, I'd like to thank our sponsors for tomorrow's tournament and for this weekend, obviously without whom we would be we would need some help. But we have a great group of sponsors that support us each year. And with regards to that, I'd like to thank the Select Sector Spiders, Alston and Bird, Doctors Community Hospital, Titleist, the Brady Agency, Jones Global, Sun Ice, Morrison HC, DJJ Technologies, the Farrell Law Firm, and Clover Whiskey. Thank you very much for your support. Without you, we wouldn't be able to put on a weekend like this. I'd also like to welcome some special guests. You've met DeWitt Weaver and Sid Matthews. I'd like to welcome Charlie Harrison, Dr. Linton Hopkins, and a person you'll hear from in a little while, John McGinnis. On a personal note, I get a lot of support from my friends and family, many of whom travel a great distance to be here each year. And I'd like to thank all you guys for coming and for the support you give me each year. We have a couple of members of our Board of Trustees, which we also call the Bobby Jones Society, who are with us here tonight. Please welcome Kate Laird and Cody Laird. And finally, we also have a few members of our Board of Directors who are here. Lori Watkins, Lori Watson. Sorry about that, Lori. Catherine Lowen. James Raines. And Dr. Bob Jones IV. Oh, and one other person, Kim Dawson. At this point, I'd like to bring up Bob Jones IV, who's going to say a few words.
Thank you, Paul. This is such an exciting time for us as a family because for many, many years we have had a really deep and caring association with the Chiari and Siringo Maillia Foundation. But a few months, I guess 6 or 7 months ago now, I had a nice conversation with Dorothy about What would it be like if we could actually link up the Bobby Jones name with this foundation? And we're so excited that this will be the first year that the Bobby Jones Classic will be for the Bobby Jones Chiari and Syringomyelia Foundation. Thank you. Our family is so thrilled to be involved with this project. We've had only a very few people who have not been able to be here over the weekend. Mimi's and my sister Adele has back injury, not syringomyelia, thank God, but she has a bad back and just could not travel. But Mary, our cousin Mary Black, was here yesterday for the launch at Bobby Jones Golf Club, and I want to introduce the family members that are here today. And I'd like for them to stand when I call on them so that I can say that I actually have disrupted their meal. So, I want to start with my sister Mimi Jones Hedwig from Chattanooga, Tennessee. Mimi, if you would stand up. My nephew Walker Westbrook was here yesterday. He is also on the Board of Trustees. Now I would like to also recognize my cousin Ann Laird and her husband Cody. I'll let you guys stand. And their children are here as well. Kate, Malone, Maddie, and Cody the fourth. It's your turn, guys. Up you go. And then I want to also introduce my cousin Robert Jones Black. Robert, I know you're here somewhere. There you are. I just looked for the guy with the same hairline that I have. You know, I have to tell you, Robert said to me 2 years ago, he said, you know what we really need to do is we really need to become involved with a foundation. And I remember saying to him, Robert, that is the craziest idea I have ever heard in my life. So I want to say publicly tonight, I was wrong. This is the greatest idea you've ever had, and you've had a bunch of them. I want to take just a few minutes, since we have a fairly new crowd and you didn't get a chance to hear me yesterday talk about my grandfather. I want to tell you a little bit about our grandfather and great-grandfather. Now, most of you may know he was born on St. Patrick's Day of 1902, March the 17th. What you may not know is that he had a brother that died in infancy just the year prior, who had been born on St. Patrick's Day of 1901. And he had a terrible failure to thrive kind of situation, a whole host of problems that nobody even remotely understood at the time. And by the time they buried little Bailey Jones in August of 1901, she was already pregnant with the man who would become the greatest golfer of his day. Bub did not eat solid food until he was about 5 years old and was always plagued with a very sensitive digestion throughout his life. He took up golf almost accidentally when Stuart Maiden became the pro at East Lake, which you will see tomorrow. Bub started following him around and simply imitating what he saw. From his first tournament at the age of 6, he then went on to play and win the Georgia State Amateur in 1916 when he was 14 years old, and then started playing in national championships beyond that point. Finally, he won his first United States Open in 1923, and I think Sydney would even agree with me that, which, you know, when I get a lawyer to agree with me, that's a great thing. Well, you bet. From 1923 to 1930, Bub went on a tournament tear that the world of golf really never saw anything quite like that until Tiger Woods went on his streak, starting, I guess, in about 1997. From 23 to 30, Bub won 4 United States Opens, 5 United States Amateurs. He won 3 British Opens, and he won 1 British Amateur. He still holds the record to this day of having the most USGA titles in history. Now, I want you to think about that for a minute, because nowadays the United States Golf Association hosts, what is it, Sid, something like 15 different national championships? Thank you very much. For his day, they essentially held two, the Open and the Amateur. And he still holds the record for most USGA titles in history. He was the first man in history to win the double, which was the United States and British Open in the same year. And then in 1930, he became the only person to win the Grand Slam, all 4 major championships within the same calendar year. Following that, we like to say that he retired, but in fact he retired from competitive golf. He continued to make contributions to the game of golf in the design of Augusta National Golf Club, the foundation of the Masters Tournament. Later, he would become involved with the foundation and design of Peachtree Golf Club here in Atlanta. Bub was a man who believed in possibilities, and he believed that anything was indeed possible, a trait that he gained from his mother, who was a rather fierce character in her own right. But he didn't realize that his greatest victory that he would ever achieve would ultimately be in his battle that he fought against what would be his most implacable foe, and that is syringomyelia. He acquired syringomyelia most likely in a very freak accident during a thunderstorm at East Lake Golf Club when a bolt of lightning struck the chimney and a piece of the chimney hit him in the neck. He went through, after World War II, he started experiencing so much pain that he finally had to sort of stop playing and go in for some exploratory surgery at Emory University, always thinking that, well, I'll get back to the game again. And he never did. Finally diagnosed by Dr. Houston Merritt at Teachers College at Columbia University in 1950, he was told the horrible news: you have this condition called syringomyelia, and the sad part is there's really nothing we can do about it. And yet he bore it with style and grace, which is an amazing thing when you think about it. Most people, and I think I'm that way, I don't think I would be without my share of self-pity in the face of something like that. And yet, as Herbert Warren Wind would later say about him, in his younger years, he stood up with grace and dignity to just about the best that life has to offer, which is not easy. And yet, in later life, he stood up with equal grace and dignity to just about the worst. And he did. And he did. He never complained, not to his family. He would occasionally complain to his physician. At one point, Bub had wasted away to about 100 pounds. He was in talking to his physician, Dr. Ralph Murphy, and Dr. Murphy suggested that, his quality of life might be a little better if maybe he considered cutting down smoking, to which Bub laughed a little bit, and they both lit up a cigarette and talked. Later, he would write Ralph a letter, and he would say, "Dear Ralph," he said, "I do want you to know," and he said, "I don't want to talk about this with anybody other than you," but he said, "I'm not really sure how much more of this quality of life I can stand." So he did suffer. He did suffer, and he did it with grace, but he was a very real human being in dealing with that. The end came for him in December of 1971. He was surrounded by his family, and he had had an aortic aneurysm that had ruptured, and his blood pressure by this time was so low that it took him 2 weeks to bleed in his abdomen. And he fortunately had very little pain, very little discomfort. 3 days before he died, he was baptized, and 2 days before he died, he turned to his family and his friends and he said, "If this is what it's like to die, it's beautiful." Shortly after, he closed his eyes for the last time and passed away on Saturday morning, December the 18th of 1971. His legacy still lives on to a large extent through us, his biological family, but it also lives on from the people who love him. It lives on in a scholarship program at Emory University. It lives on with the United States Golf Association and the Bob Jones Award. It lives on anywhere golfers seem to get together. There's always Bob Jones stories galore. And now it lives on here It lives on with the Bobby Jones, Chiari, and Syringomyelia Foundation. Because a lot of people can't pronounce Chiari, and they can't pronounce Syringomyelia, but we can pronounce Bobby Jones. We can tell the story about how this wonderful man suffered and yet at the same time achieved a spiritual and psychological victory over this very dreadful condition. And we can do more than that. Through the work together with Bobby Jones CSF, we can provide research, we can provide medical expertise, we can provide psychological expertise, and most of all, through Bobby Jones CSF, we can provide hope. Because what we know from the life of Bobby Jones and the witness of all of you who are in this room, is that together, anything is possible. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to now introduce Dr. Ian Hager. Ian has been part of our organization for several years now. He has hosted medical lectures in Augusta, Georgia. He is currently moving to Dallas to resume his practice there. And he will speak tonight to give you the medical presentation of Chiari and Syringomyelia.
Thank you. I do a lot of things under pressure, but having to follow Bob is kind of one of the more difficult things that I've done. But we'll give a go at this. I really don't want to bore you too much with the medical aspects of it, because I could probably be up here talking for way too long about that. But I think I wanted to focus on something I believe is actually more important than the granular aspects of the medical components of Chiari and Syringomyelia. I don't want to, educate you on that tonight. But what I want to do is get to a more, I think, important question: is why is it so important that we're all here, and why is the Bobby Jones CSF Foundation so important? And got my outline here, and the interesting thing is, about me in particular, I've been involved in Syringomyelia and Chiari for a long time, so much so that now I look at this outline without my reading glasses. I got to put this out here. There was a time where that was not necessary, and I was involved in this. So regarding myself, this summer it's actually going to be 29 years that I've been involved in Syringomyelia. I got out of college, and I got a job working in a lab in Brooklyn, New York, with someone who ended up being my mentor in neurosurgery, actually. And almost about the same time, Dorothy got involved, and we were both asking the same questions for different reasons. What is Syringomyelia? I was working in a lab and doing research, and Dorothy was came a little bit closer to home for her. But what I learned being in that environment, now mind you too, this is 1990. A few years earlier, this new imaging technique called MRI, which we all know and is so ubiquitous nowadays, had actually just been developed. Actually was developed at our institution initially, quite frankly. But that was a changing event for Chiari and Syringomyelia. In fact, that's when we actually started understanding the association between Chiari as a causative feature of Syringomyelia. But what we saw then was this disease was destroying people's lives. And there was very little understanding of what this disease actually was. many people went many years with psychiatric diagnoses before they got this new imaging study called an MRI, which actually then showed what the problem was. And I have to say, I would actually be very happy if I said that doesn't happen anymore, but it still does. A lot of the same things that were occurring 29 years ago still do. The science has come a long way. We've learned a lot about this disease. We understand it a lot better than we ever did, but there's still many questions that we need to answer. You know, I've heard Bob talk many times about his grandfather, and what always has struck me is, you know, the way he dealt with this disease was a testament to his strength and courage. And you know, he talks about all his accolades as an athlete, and it's so clear that this disease robbed him physically at the prime of his life. This still does happen. I see it every day, and I'm sure that the neurosurgeons, you know, my colleagues that are here today, would say the same thing. We still see this happening. Despite everything that we've done to understand and to treat these patients, it's unfortunate that we still have people suffering tremendously from this. And I'll also add, it doesn't just affect individuals. It affects families. You know, and we see that, you know, as a pediatric neurosurgeon, I see that very clearly, because these are children that I'm dealing with. It affects the parents, and how it affects the parents affects how they raise the siblings. But even in an adult situation, patients are also mothers and fathers and children themselves. And the ripple effect that this has through people's lives can be disastrous. And a few years ago, I started getting more involved in this. I sort of, you know, Dorothy and I, we went our own different paths, and she stayed and became an advocate for Chiari and syringomyelia patients. And I went on into practice. And I still treated, you know, everything with children, including Chiari malformations. And, you know, then a couple of years ago, you know, started having a little less hair on top of my head, and my beard started getting a little more gray, and, you know, the person that trained me retired, and the people that were at the top of the fields who are colleagues of his retired, and it became apparent to me that it was necessary to someone needed to pick up the torch. And lots of people have, and I decided to do the same as well. And what I think is important about CSF and Bobby Jones, not just the fact that, you know, you come here and you get to play East Lake Golf Course, which I enjoy even though I suck at golf. The way this organization has been run is top-notch. It's really a comprehensive way of attacking this disease. This organization mobilizes the scientists and the physicians, whether that be with research money, or probably more importantly, getting them all into the same room together to talk, to exchange ideas, come up with theories, test those theories. And beyond that, putting together the fact that this organization pushed for the common data elements. It's so profound, getting doctors to speak the same language. If everybody's talking different tongues, you can't advance the field. And that's been accomplished. getting doctors to try and figure out which is the best operation to do. We all have our different ideas. We all have our preferences. We all know what works best in our own hands. But what's the best way for all the patients? That's being done. So it's very important that we're all here. It's very important to hear about the legacy of Bobby Jones. I spent many a night listening to my mentor, hearing about his legacy. And I think the two things that show me something. The realization that we can't accomplish what these people have, but we can still contribute. We can make a difference. We don't have to do grand things. We can play a part. And with this organization, and I've watched it sort of grow together and become what it is, I think we all can accomplish something, and I think we can all make a difference. So I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you for your time.
All right. We're gonna do like I do with my 4-year-old son, and I'm gonna tell you guys 5 minutes. No, but we're gonna go ahead and jump to the next part. I'm Robert Jones Black, and I'm going to introduce our MC for the next part of this, John McGinnis. I'm a great friend of John's. I met him probably about 10 years ago. John McGinnis spent 9 years on the PGA Tour. He is now multiple talents, both, well, we always say John has the face for radio, so, but he is, he works with PGA radio. He has got his show, Katrick and McGinnis on Tap, that's on the PGA channel on Sirius XM. Great to have him as a part of this. He's been a part of this for a couple years now. He's going to come up and he's going to just run a show, and I'm telling you, when John does this, he himself could sit up here for 20 minutes and entertain you guys, no problem, but we're going to have him actually have to participate with other people. But my great friend, John McGinnis.
I believe what Robert was trying to say is, here's the skunk at the garden party. I'm pretty sure that's where he was going with all of that. It turns out that in this room right now there are legends, whether you knew it or not. And I'm going to start by introducing somebody you've already heard from, Bob Jones IV, who's going to come up here and help me, because the fact of the matter is he knows the other two gentlemen very well. Bob Jones IV, who tells the story of the Jones family as well as it can possibly be told. Give him another round of applause if you don't mind. One of the great legacies of Bobby Jones was the fact that he was a career amateur. Well, so was Charlie Harrison, a career amateur. And one of the greats has records like winning the Georgia Amateur 10 times? 11 times? Is that right? Whatever it is, it'll never be broken. Ladies and gentlemen, a member of the Georgia Golf Hall of Fame, Charlie Harrison. And a pro's pro, in slight contrast. DeWitt Weaver played on the PGA Tour, a multiple winner on the PGA Tour, happened to turn the age of the Champions Tour player at about the time when the Champions Tour started to flourish. Had an incredible career. Cannot wait to hear from him, Mr. DeWitt Weaver. Yeah, perfect. Well, here, we'll get you up. Perfect. Apparently, we're playing musical chairs up here, Mr. Harrison.
Gotta go quickly.
Well, let's start with you. The East Lake Golf Club, if you haven't played it, boy, are you in for a treat tomorrow. You have spent most of your life there, and the caddy program is named after you. What does that mean? Not after you? I'm sorry. Oh, after Mr. Harrison. I'm sorry, Mr. Harrison. Right. Well, you guys switched chairs on me. You screwed me up. Mr. Harrison, what does that mean to you to have the caddy scholarship program named after you? There's a microphone right in front of you.
Well, of course, it's quite an honor, and we've had wonderful success with it. Got quite a few children in college, and so we're very proud of it.
As well, you should be.
Thank you.
What is the transformation that we've seen at East Lake over the last 25 years?
Well, since you asked the other question, I'll say this. When we took over that program, Mr. Tom Cousins bought East Lake, and he had a dream of renovating the old golf course and bringing it back to its original prestige. He also had the idea of bringing Bobby Jones' name back, because people in Atlanta, golfers, didn't know who Bobby Jones was. And then the third one was to try to get the neighborhood revitalized. At that time, the Drew School, which is a project in East Lake, had never graduated a child from high school into college. Zero. Only 5% of those children, the senior class, met the requirements, state requirements, minimum requirements. Last year, we graduated, every kid graduated from the class. All were eligible for college scholarships. And that's quite a change in 15, 20 years.
Mr. Weaver, yes, it is.
Happy to know him.
I was about to say, you look like you have something to add.
Well, no, we just, all I can tell you is we go back years and years, and Charlie and I played each other in the Southern Amateur at Ormond Beach back in 1962. So that was a few years ago. And
I'm sorry you mentioned that, because they whooped me bad.
Now, the only real regret I had is I never met Bobby Jones. I won in 1971, which put me in the Masters in 72 and 3. And so I never met Bobby Jones. But that's the one regret I really have, because I just idolized the man so much. Yeah.
Mr. Harrison, you knew Mr. Jones. What are your recollections?
Well, I really didn't know a whole lot about him until my father joined the East Lake Club during World War II. He had been an athletic member of the old athletic club back when the days of John Heisman and so forth were coaching in those days. And but he went off to war in World War I and came back and had to go to work for a living, so athletics was sidelined. But when World War II broke out, they were giving away memberships at East Lake because all the men were off to war and they were trying to keep East Lake going. And both my father and Tom Cousins' father joined East Lake Club during that time of World War II. And that's what introduced me to golf. I really wasn't into golf. I was swimming and lifeguarding and working on the tennis courts and so forth.
Chasing women.
Well, I didn't get to that. I wouldn't admit it now anyway. But
You caught a good one over there, though.
But yeah, I did. But well, let's don't get into that. But anyway, my daddy did tell me that the greatest golfer that ever lived was playing golf at East Lake. And don't bother him, but whenever you see him hitting shots, you go over there and sit down and watch him. So we did, and he was very gracious. Would always see us over there watching him, and he would contact us and ask us how we were doing and so forth. So that was my introduction to Bobby Jones, and it was quite exciting.
What'd you glean from that? What did you get from watching perhaps the greatest golfer of all time?
Well, maybe
hit golf
one
balls?
time I did, I was sitting at the pool with Tom, it was a lake at that time, and Tom Cousins and I told Tom, I said, you know, the greatest golfer that ever lived is playing golf. Let's go out and watch him. And so we got in my grandmother's 1932 Pontiac and drove around the golf course to what was then the 13th hole. Now I guess it's the 4th hole. But Jones was in the middle of the fairway, which required a little slight hook around a big oak tree. And he hit it about a foot from the hole. And I turned to Tom, I said, see, he does it every time. And we didn't even watch him putt out. We went back to where the girls were at the swimming pool. There you go.
I understand that. Not sure where to go from there, but I understand that. That 1971 Masters, you got to pull down Magnolia Lane. Do you remember about being in that
Well, I
Masters?
asked my wife, I said, she asked me, she says, what do you see so exciting about going down Magnolia Lane? That's what she asked me. And I says, well, just take a look, you know. It was magnificent. I played with Gene Sarazen in his last Masters in 1972, his last Masters. So that ages me just a little bit, but Sherry said she's never seen anybody play so fast as Gene Sarazen, ever. And that is fast. That's real fast.
Do you remember anything about that day with him, about Gene Sarazen?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, like I say, he just played faster than anybody I've ever seen, and I was running to keep up. And, you know, and I was launching it about 60 yards past him every time I hit it, because I could really hit it back then. I was the longest on the PGA Tour in 1969, a yard longer than Jack Nicklaus. So, and to me, Jack Nicklaus is the greatest golfer that ever lived, and he always will be, in my opinion. So that's what I think.
I don't know that history's going to argue with you. There's a fun argument that we can have in the bar over there about who the greatest is of all time, because that's where all the problems get solved these days, apparently.
I was a great friend of Arnold Palmer, but my wife Sherry was even a greater friend of Arnold Palmer.
Well, that's how Arnold was. You guys have seen this game evolve from Bobby Jones to Tiger Woods, and now really even beyond Tiger Woods. When you were talking about the legacy of Bob Jones earlier, I felt like the thing that my era of player got from Bob Jones wasn't something you mentioned, and that is the expressed detail to the integrity of the game, which is, for my generation, that's what Bob Jones is known for. And I think that it's a credit to the name Bob Jones that's a fact. When you hear people talk about the integrity of a family member and as it regards to the game, what do you think of that?
Well, I think that is something that truly did set my grandfather apart, even during his time. But I think in fairness to the players today, I think it's an extraordinarily difficult thing for them because they live in a fishbowl that Bub never had to experience. I mean, you know, Bub had his second ticker tape parade in New York City in 1930. He is probably the most well-known athlete, certainly in the United States at the time. And he walks out to the sidewalk the night they're sweeping up the street after all the ticker tape. He's standing next to a New York policeman, and he said, "So tell me, officer, what's all the fuss about?" And the cop just looked at him and said, "Oh, it's just a parade for some damn golfer." Well, but that highlights something. He was the most well-known athlete of his day, but nobody would have picked him up out of a lineup for the most part, because you didn't have the 24-hour news cycle that you have now, or the ESPN sports cycle that you have now. Any top player on the PGA Tour gets more media coverage probably in a week than recognizable media coverage than Bub probably got in a year.
I would agree with that. I would actually say that through the internet and all of I've actually gotten to know his golf swing through YouTube, which is mind-boggling. But I had never seen Bobby Jones swing a golf club until 10 years ago, for that very reason. Based on that and all we know about the game, I want to ask these two gentlemen. Obviously, the game is very different today, but what are the elements of the game that keep it the essence of golf, Mr. Harrison?
You asking me that when he knows more about golf than I ever thought of knowing?
Well, I'm going to ask him too. I was asking you
right.
first. I was letting you set the table.
Well, let me answer that by saying that the first time I actually had a chance to talk to Bobby Jones in a serious atmosphere, I had just gone to work at a Dare Realty and Loan Company, and my boss, Bill Leidy, was writing some of Bobby Jones's personal insurance. And he tapped me on the shoulder one day and he said, I've been there for 30 days at work. And he said, let's go, we need to talk to Bobby Jones about some insurance. So I headed up there with him, and I was pretty excited about it because I really not gotten that close to him in any way. And he got the insurance business out of the way. This was in 1954, he was already had the disease at that time, and he was pretty crippled up. But he loved to talk about golf. And he got the insurance business out of the way and started telling us how we could prepare for a golf tournament, how he prepared for a golf tournament. And I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm going to learn from the master how to prepare for a golf tournament. And he said what he did, he didn't play in that many tournaments like they do today. He played in about 6 tournaments or 7, 8 tournaments. And he said what he did is he took off from work 2 weeks prior to the tournament, and he just concentrated on golf for that 2-week period. Didn't go to the office. Just if it rained, he read a book or did something, but he just got his mind on golf. So that was his lesson of how he was getting ready to play in a tournament. And I turned to my boss, Bill Leidy at the time, and I said, that sounds like a good idea for me. and Jones leaned across the desk and says, damn, Harrison, I'm not talking about a city amateur. So he put me in my place right there on the spot.
I read about everything that Bobby Jones wrote in all his books, and one thing I did is the last one I read that I picked up that the first thing that he did was move to his right side, which Charlie does so well, and move to your right side, and then the turn happens rather than just trying to turn. And so that really set me up. I shot 67 at age 67 about 5 days after that. So, and it was just because of that one thing, is moving to my right side and moving, that allowed me to really play.
You're not going to be able to get a game tomorrow after saying that. You know that, right?
No, I'm not playing tomorrow.
Oh, I understand. It's going to be cold.
No, I'm serious. I'm serious. I'm not playing tomorrow. That a year ago I was supposed to play in this, and then I came down with a bypass surgery on my heart. So I'm not playing tomorrow, and I'd love to play tomorrow because I think the charity is magnificent. I gave a little bit, which I can't do, but I did, and gave a little bit, and I just think it's a wonderful, wonderful charity that everybody ought to take part in.
I couldn't agree more. That's very well said. You and I are both old pros. Now I'm not as old a pro as you are, but I didn't play on the PGA Tour when somebody could win $2 million in a week. And I try not to think about it very often, but every now and then I think about it on occasion. How about you?
It's amazing. Yeah, I won $35,000 of my first win on tour, 35, and I won 20 the next year in the Southern Open. So they get a little more money than now, a little bit anyway, don't they?
They do. They do just fine.
I'm going to tell Dick Ham a minute. He's my partner tomorrow. And don't worry, I'm not going to try to get back on my right side, because if I do, I'm going to hit it fat. So that won't work for me, so I won't try that again.
You know, one of the things that was just that you were bringing up, DeWitt, when you were talking about that getting on the right side thing, and I guess this is a question I would ask for both of you, because both of you are about two of the finest golfers I've ever, and finest gentlemen I've ever known in my life. And both, by the way, if you can't see it, they're both members of the Georgia Golf Hall of Fame. So these are not slouches in anything they do. But the question that I would ask for both of you, you can decide, you can arm wrestle to see who goes first, is you were talking about that movement. Are the fundamentals of Bobby Jones' game, are those, you know, now that we're in this modern day of stack and tilt and all this other stuff, do those fundamentals still have a place in today's golf game? And if so, why?
Well, I was taught by Sam Bird, who was the backup outfielder for Babe Ruth, and Sam said he made more money from Babe Ruth than he did playing for the Yankees. But this new swing that's out, this catapult swing, it's on YouTube now, is the way I was taught by Sam Bird, is that you get back and you release earlier rather than late. And that's not always the way to do it, I don't guess, because there are a lot of people that don't do that. But, you know, that's the way I was taught by Sam Bird. And Jimmy Ballard teaches that way, and Jim Grant teaches that way. But I was taught that way, and my record shows that I did okay at times. I blew more tournaments than I won, I'll promise you that.
Mr. Nicklaus finished second 19 times in the majors. You could say he blew more majors than he won, if you wanted to.
Well, I dusted him the last time I played with him at the Senior Open. the Senior Open down at in Palm Beach Gardens. I shot 67 that day, and he shot 73. And they never showed me on TV. Never did. I have no idea why they didn't.
Did you hit it by him all day?
Oh, every time.
Does it hurt your feelings to know that his youngest made his Champions Tour debut last week?
Oh, yeah. No, my son could too, my oldest, but he's just a very fine amateur. So.
Well, one of the finest amateurs, and
This man is.
And I want to ask, why is that a dying breed? Why are there no career amateurs anymore?
Too much money out there to be a pro.
There you go. Isn't that the truth?
It's just that simple.
That's the truth.
Yeah. You had guys like Billy Joe Patton and let's see, Harvey Ward did eventually turn pro, but it was after he was a great player. Yeah. But who was that? Yeah, well, Venturi turned pro too, or they turned him pro.
Well, and Jay Siegel, and I mean, you can look at his amateur career and Alan Doyle's amateur career, and
Right.
they turned 50 and they just couldn't help
turned
themselves.
pro.
They just couldn't help themselves. So you can't really blame them for that.
Yeah, there's just so much money out there. In fact, Bobby Jones told me one time when I was chatting with him that when Nicholas was like 14, 15 years old, maybe a little older than that, 16 years old, he said, Jack Nicklaus will be the greatest golfer that ever lived. And I thought, God, how can you tell that from a guy who's 16 years old? And then later, when he did turn pro, Mark McCormick, I believe I'm correct in saying this, Jack Nicklaus didn't ever have to make a putt, and he would have won $100,000 a year based on his contract. So the pressure was off of him right there. He had it already made, in my estimation of life, without ever succeeding. And you got a guy like Tommy Aaron, when he's a local guy here in Atlanta, he turned pro, or actually up in Gainesville, Georgia, and he went out on his own. He got people offering to sponsor, and he said, no, I think I'll go on my own. And he went out and he won right off the bat. He had a great swing and a good attitude about the game, but he didn't have all the qualities that some of these other players had. But he ended up not doing too bad, winning the Masters tournament in '73. That wasn't too bad.
Not bad at all.
No.
Which leads me to how I'd like to end this, and I want to work right down the panel here. We are 1 week away from Masters Week. When Masters Week rolls around, what memories come to your head? What do you look forward to most? And will you make it out to Augusta this year? We'll start with you, Mr. Weaver.
Well, Sherry and I may go down there, and we usually go down on par 3 day because they have all their kids, and we really enjoy all that part. And the last time we were there, we were with our grandson Jack, and Palmer was playing. And he came up and kissed my wife, of course. And he didn't kiss me, he kissed her. And he just shook my grandson's hand, and he's just the most gracious person that I had ever met. And he's the only guy that allowed to kiss her too. But it was a great outing, and I try to go back. We try to go back about every other year if we can. So I'm looking forward to it, and I'd like for Nicholas to win it, but I don't think he's going to this year.
Mr. Harrison, what springs to mind when you think of Masters Week?
How dumb I was. I got told after I had qualified to play in the Masters in 1960 that I could come over and play Augusta anytime I wanted to because I had qualified to play in the tournament. And we didn't have I-20 back in those days, and I would have to play on the weekends mostly because I'm still trying to make a living. And I never went.
Not once?
I did not ever go over to play in the Masters, to practice for the Masters. Brian Snedeker was from Nashville, and he qualified, and I think he went 93 times to get ready for it. Now, I'd say he was a little more determined to win than I was.
Well, didn't you just tell us that Mr. Jones told you to take 2 weeks off before a golf tournament and to get ready?
I did.
He beat Hogan. He beat Hogan in a practice round playing there.
And Palmer, didn't you?
I believe,
Yes, Hogan
I
and
believe
Palmer.
some of us have heard pieces of this
We don't
story.
have enough time. That's a 4-hour story. Yeah,
Yeah, we don't have enough time for that.
How much did you win?
$35, and I got it in cash.
You got a dozen golf balls, too.
2 dozen.
2 dozen.
Yeah. But, Hogan was a mystery man, kind of, for most people. Now, DeWitt knew him better than I did because I just had that one round with him that he did not have any interest in playing with me. But Arnold took me for a partner against him. But people don't realize, or the people that don't know a lot about golf, after his serious accident, he played in 6 tournaments in this time period, won 5 of them, I believe it was, 3 majors, and he finished second in the other one. Oh, he didn't play in the 4th major. There's one tournament that he didn't win. So in a short period of time, he had an absolute controlled golf game. And
you whipped him.
Whether it would have lasted much longer than that, I don't know. And I don't think anybody knows. But for that short period of time, he was the greatest striker of the ball of anybody, including Tiger Woods and Jack Nicklaus and all of them. His percentage of that short period. So I would say from a short period of time, he achieved a height that none of them had achieved. But that's why you've got to give Jack Nicklaus the #1 spot, because he did it for such a long period of time.
And finally, Mr. Jones, when you think of Augusta National, when you go next week, what do you look forward to most? What springs to mind?
Well, I think the thing I look forward to the most is actually seeing old friends, seeing a lot of people that I never see other than during that week. But the 2 memories that stick out the most to me was when I first went at 12 years old. I was 12 years old, and it was 1970. Cliff Roberts had a rule at that time that you couldn't go to the Masters until you were 12 years old. Of course, Cliff had a lot of rules, so that really wasn't a surprise in and of itself. But I got there very late at night, and I was staying in the Jones cabin. I was sharing a room with my dad, who was a horrific snorer, but that's another story. And the next morning, I woke up at about 6:15, and I walked out onto the porch of the Jones cabin, and the sun was coming up, and the mowers were moving over the golf course, and I looked out, and I'd never seen Augusta before in my life. And the first thing that occurred to me was it was the first time I'd ever been hit by the enormity of who Bobby Jones really was. And it occurred to me that everything I was seeing had existed in my grandfather's mind before a spade of dirt had been turned over on the property. And then later in the tournament, my father was very proud to be a rules official at the Masters, and he worked on 15. Dad was a vice president of the club and was very, very, very proud of being an official. And on, I forget which day, it must have been a weekend day, because Dad was working 15, and back then they used to sell these box lunches that you could get, like a piece of chicken and a biscuit and a soda, and it came in this nice little box. And George Archer teed off on 15, and he pushed his tee shot, and it took 1 hop, and it landed in this lady's box of fried chicken. Now, George is clearly entitled to a drop in that situation, but being the Masters, he didn't want to take any chances, and so he called my dad over for a ruling. Now, right about this time, you have to understand, right at this moment, CBS goes live on the air, okay? And so we're going to go over to 15 now, where there's a little rules controversy with George Archer. So Dad walks over, and we were wearing matching cobalt blue Sansa belt pants. Okay, and I mean, some people obviously know the era, and at any rate, I mean, if it had been a fire, we would have died in molten polyester. But at any rate, so Dad goes over. He's standing over this box of chicken, and right as the camera is closing up on him, he bends over to look at the box of chicken. And he's right about to reach for the ball when all of a sudden he feels a gust of air, and he realizes that his pants have split from belt line to crotch, right with CBS's camera right on him. And Mimi can tell you, Dad just could be very unflappable, and all he did, he used to have a cigarette that he kept in a Dunhill holder because he thought it would cut down the tar and nicotine, which it would have if he ever changed the filter. But so he's sitting there with his cigarette. He stands up and he just sits there. I'm standing right there, and he turns to George. He says, "George, I believe you're entitled to relief in this situation." And that's about all he says there. And then he turns to me and he says, "Son, do you think you could run up to the cabin and get my rain pants?" And he spent the entire rest of the day, 85-degree Augusta day, refereeing the 15th hole in his green jacket and these rain pants. It was an attractive sight.
He never told me that story.
Me either.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bob Jones IV, Charlie Harrison, the Wet Weaver.
Thank you, Tom.
Excellent. Well done.